In the early 1930s, Japan was grumbling about the perceived inequalities of the Washington Treaty. In regard to carriers, this was only made worse when the 1930 First London Treaty closed the loophole that carriers under 10,000 tons wouldn't count against a country's total tonnage limit. This was despite everyone knowing that in the event of war, the US or British could outbuild Japan. To get around the treaty and help level the odds, Japan began work on a shadow fleet. In this particular case, it was a series of ships that could alternately be completed as, or relatively easily converted into, either seaplane tenders, submarine tenders, tankers, or light carriers. To state the obvious, in retrospect, they should have gone with the tankers. Instead, most were completed as tenders and later converted. All were started before the expiration of the Washington/First London Treaty. Usually, these ships are divided into several classes, but I'm just going to lump them all together. Also, I'm not going to go over their pre-conversion specs or activities. After conversion, all had one hangar, 2 elevators, no island with the bridge being at the front of the hangar, destroyer turbines, and were bulged to improve stability and regain lost buoyancy. Like most carriers, the hangar and flight deck were superstructure built on top of the hangar, with the hangar being enclosed. The dog of the lot was Zuihou. This was mostly a result of being the first built in the early 1930s. We all know what that means for Japanese ships. In short, extensive use of welding and substandard materials left the hull fragile, the frame weak. She was top-heavy, and the engines were troublesome. These faults were mostly corrected as part of the Navy's post-Fourth Fleet incident rebuilds. Unfortunately, the only way to do it was to add more weight, mostly down below. Then, when she was converted, even more weight was added. This meant after conversion, she was significantly heavier than her half-sisters, and as a consequence, was slower, and her hull was more heavily stressed. On top of that, the build quality was generally still not good. On the upside, she did outlive all of her half-sisters. Shoho, we barely knew you, buddy. Zuihou was probably the best of the lot, or at least the most active. Chiyoda and Chitose had the advantage of being converted not only after the other 3, but also after the Battle of Midway. As a result, they had marginally better protection, and their main deck was higher. They also retained their diesel engines, so not only were they faster, but also had something resembling backup power in case the main boilers were knocked out. As an almost ran, we can add the Mizuho and Nishin. Both were completed as tenders. Both were potential conversions, but were sunk before any work was carried out.
水を沈むのですね。でも、今度はお役に立てて、水を、よかったです。
Mizuho being sunk May 2nd, 1942 by the submarine Drum.
これで終わりかね。また、沈むんじゃのう。嫌じゃのう。
And Nishin being sunk July 22nd, 1943 in an airstrike. We'll get to the escort carriers separately. On the whole, they weren't as good as their American counterparts, the Independence class. But what would you expect? Again, they would have been more useful as tankers since Japan never had a carrier shortage. That is to say, they never had more aircraft than carrier capacity. The future Zuihou was started as Tagi.
こんにちは。潜水母艦大芸です。ふつつか者ですが、よろしくお願いいたします。
April 12th, 1933, and was completed March 31st, 1935.
潜水母艦改装空母の劉邦です。航空母艦として、私、頑張ります。
Conversion to an aircraft carrier was started December 1941 and was completed November 1942 with a weight of 13,360 tons.
千歳です。日本では初めての水上規模艦なのよ。よろしくね。
Chitose was started November 29, 1939 and was completed July 25, 1938.
ダイエットして空母になった千歳です。足も速くなったの。本でも出そうかしら。
Conversion to a light carrier was started in January 1943 and was completed in January 1944 with a displacement of 11,190 tons.
軽空母、zuihouです。はい。ちょっと小柄ですけど、ぜひ提督の機動部隊に加えてくださいね。
The future Zuihou was started as Tsurugisaki December 3rd, 1934 and was completed January 1st, 1939. Conversion to an aircraft carrier was started in January 1941 and was completed in January 1942 with a displacement of 11,262 tons.
zuihouです。軽空母ですが、練度が上がれば、正規空母並みの活躍を見せてきます。
The two have been named Takasaki was started June 20th, 1935, but was completed as the light carrier Zuihou December 27th, 1940, with a displacement of 11,262 tons.
水上規模艦千代田です。姉の千歳がいつも迷惑かけてないですか？
Chiyoda was started December 14th, 1936, and was completed December 15th, 1938.
空母になった千代田です。ぜひ、千歳よねと一緒に機動部隊を編成してね。
Conversion to a light carrier was started in August 1942 and was completed in October 1943 with a displacement of 11,190 tons. Main armament was 4 twin 127mm 45 caliber dual-purpose guns on sponsons, 2 mounts on each side at hangar level. Protection was very light. At best 13mm over the engine rooms on Ryuho. Having been rebuilt after Midway, Chiyoda and Chitose had 25mm over the magazines and 70mm over the engine spaces. Propulsion was provided by 4 boilers venting to 1 funnel, which came out midship on the starboard side at the hangar level and bent downward. Chiyoda and Chitose additionally retained their 2 diesels for more power. These vented to their own smaller funnel, which also came out the starboard side at hangar level but further aft, just forward of the rear elevator. These provided steam to 2 turbines, each running a propeller to generate 52,000 horsepower, 56,800 in Chiyoda and Chitose, for a speed of 26 knots in Ryuho, 28 knots in Sho and Zui, and 29 knots in Chiyoda and Chitose. Ryuho's flight deck was 185 by 23 meters. The other's flight deck was 180 by 23 meters. Their hangars were 124 by 18.6 by 5 meters high. Ryuho's elevators were both 13.6 meters by 12 meters. Shoho and Zuihou's front elevator was 13 by 12 meters and the rear elevator was 12 by 10.8 meters. Chiyoda and Chitose's front elevator was 13 meters by 12 meters and the rear elevator was 12.5 meters by 12 meters. Aircraft complement was ideally 21 fighters and 9 torpedo planes. As with all Japanese carriers, though, the instability in pilot and aircraft availability meant this number varied wildly. Chiyoda and Chitose were completed with Type 21 radar. In August 1943, Ryuho was fitted with Type 21 radar. In September 1943, Zuihou's flight deck was lengthened to 192.6 meters and Type 21 radar was added. In July through August 1944, Ryuho's flight deck was lengthened to 198.1 meters and all were fitted with 6 28-cell anti-aircraft barrage rocket launchers.